Hi guys, my name's Charlie. I'm a senior studying journalism in the College of Communication. And for my project, instead of taking the sort of traditional research approach that I saw a lot of people taking, I decided to do something a little bit different, seeing as my major doesn't really lend itself much to research. So to work on my writing skills, to push my talents, and to really do something that I've always wanted an excuse to do, I decided to use my talents to write a fiction novella, which is called Celadon. So some of these characters have been in my head literally for years, being reworked and sort of evolving into different pathways, and eventually found themselves in this story that has been on my mind for a very long time, really ever since I heard about the Keystone Project with Celadon. So the process of writing this was mostly independent. I did have the help of my faculty advisor, Alicia Berinsky, who unfortunately could not be here today, who helped me out with a little bit of guidance. But for the most part, it was independent, just me on my own with my computer, just writing and editing. So the way I structured it was I planned out the sort of outline in the summer before classes started in the fall. The fall was mostly about just writing the rough draft, getting everything done without any sort of rewrites. I filled in sort of the outline that I created, not even in chronological order sometimes. And then this spring was mostly focused on editing and reworking different pieces. And a special thank you to David, Kayla, and Kristen, who all read my story and helped me out with some edits. So I really focused on manuscript quality over the actual publishing. So I don't have any plans to get it published right now, although in the future I may look into self-publishing it on Amazon. But the focus on this was really just to test my own skills and to make something that was really uniquely mine. So a synopsis of this book, it starts with our main character, Theo, who is 22 years old and in a college literature program in the 1920s. Her brother dies, and because he was the primary breadwinner of the family, she ends up having to drop out of her program and start looking for work so she can support her and her mother. So she finds a note card in the pocket of her brother's jacket after the funeral that has some vague instructions to what he had mentioned was a job opportunity. So when she follows up, she finds out it's working the books at an underground speakeasy for a mysterious woman named Cora, who apparently knew her brother. And she finds out that she really didn't know her brother as well as she thought she did. So throughout the course of the story, Theo becomes more and more involved with this underground world and starts exploring different facets of society that she really had never seen before in her more sheltered upbringing. And she finds out that everyone's really just partying and having fun. And she gets the opportunity to meet and create new connections with a lot of people that she never would have met otherwise. So it is historical fiction, as I mentioned. I wasn't particularly pressed on the details of the historical fiction, though I did do a lot of Googling to make sure that everything was as accurate as possible. But the story was primarily character-driven for me, not so much plot-driven. So my primary goal was to make sure that the character's development followed a clear path and was satisfying to the reader, rather than having everything be 100% historically accurate. I really wanted people to engage more with the characters than with the setting. The setting was more of just a fun thing for me to explore something new and try and write something that I wasn't familiar with and sort of stretch my horizons. So the main takeaways I really wanted people to get from this project is the process of grieving and how you get over it without letting it consume you. Theo learns throughout the story to honor her brother's memory and take those lessons, but not feel so bound to the past because of it. It's about how you learn to navigate the world differently. It's a little bit of a coming-of-age story. It's about learning how to function in a society that's real and not just theoretical or in her head or in the books that she reads. And it is a little bit about learning to connect with other people and really just create empathic connections, because I think that is one of the most effective ways that people learn to heal in this grieving process. So I'm going to do a short reading from the book. This is a snippet from chapter 2 that sort of sets the tone of the book without revealing too much in case people are actually interested in reading it. All of Theo's favorite stories were adventures, grand quests where the heroes defeated monsters and won the hearts of ladies, or explorers charting new lands and sailing in unknown waters. Mundane, winding stories about life were things that she could find in the world around her. She read books that took her to new and unfamiliar places. So far, the young hero of her novel had escaped the mobs and was hiding in the Paris catacombs while noblemen and their families were being guillotined left and right. Theo wasn't quite fluent in French, so the reading went slowly as she tried to decipher obscure adjectives and adverbs. Even if her plans to study in France were momentarily derailed, she still needed to practice, if only to keep the dream alive in her mind now that all their savings had been spent. Maybe in a few years she could still go, if all the most prominent authors hadn't already left Paris for the new epicenter of culture and literature, wherever that might be. Hours ticked by, and Theo had made little progress in her story. Instead, she occupied herself by watching the people who passed below the fire escape where she sat, and imagining backstories for each of them, a game she had played for as long as she could remember. The lady with the big, out-of-fashion hats and long skirts was an actress, longing for the glory days of vaudeville before the pictures came along and put her out of business. She clung to the hope that one day she'd return to the stage, but her clothes were getting faded and the money was running out. One of these days she'd collapse in despair and give up. But today was not that day, and she still strutted proudly around the streets like she was as wealthy as she was 15 years ago. The two little girls playing with rag dolls on the stoop of the building across the street were sisters, only a year apart, and the older one was tasked with watching the younger one while their parents were at work. The older girl was only 5, but she watched her mother every day doing her work around the house and thought she knew how to be a grown-up lady. The younger one didn't really know what was happening, only that she'd been instructed to stay with her sister and play. Next year, her sister will be sent to school, and she'll be all alone, unless her parents decide to put them both in the same year so they won't be apart. For now, they were playing princess with their dolls, ordering around their imaginary subjects and brushing out their long golden hair. The 3 boys at the end of the street fancied themselves a gang, even though their voices hadn't quite dropped yet. They thought they were tough and hung around on the corner to harass the younger boys on their way home from school, throwing pebbles at them and trying to trip them when they walked by. They were in school too, but they wanted to be tough, and school isn't tough at all, so they refused to go anymore. Instead, they patrolled their territory until they got bored and went to the park to play baseball or flatten cans on the train tracks. Eventually, their parents will find out they've been skipping school. If they were the oldest, they might get cuffed on the head and yelled at. If they were from a bigger family, their parents might be too tired to do anything at all. The man in the suit walking towards the train station was a very important banker, and he had to get to the stock exchange right away to make millions of dollars for his company. He would push little kids out of the way if they ran in front of him. He grew up on the streets like they did, but he made something of himself, and now he had his own apartment and a closet of nice clothes to wear to work. One of these days, he'd make enough money to move to a fancy building downtown, or maybe even a house out across the river where he can look at the skyline at night. But he was new money, not old money, so his wealthy colleagues didn't trust his ambition. He'll have to work to earn their trust, if he ever can. Bored of daydreaming, Theo got dressed into what she hoped was appropriate work attire and went to the deli at the end of the street before she left. Normally, she would have made a meal herself, but this was a special occasion, and she could spare the money from a hefty sandwich from the lively old man that ran the deli and told her every time that she was cute as a button. She took the sandwich with her and ate as she walked, looking up at the fire escapes on the tenement buildings around her and wondering if there were any girls up there watching her and inventing their own stories. Whatever they imagined for her couldn't be as crazy as the truth. So I chose this reading specifically from chapter 2 because it's early enough in the book to really set the tone without giving away too much of the plot, and it focuses on building the background rather than the action, and sort of shows how I tried my best to sort of craft a real narrative for these characters outside of what they specifically do during the plot. I think it allows a glimpse into the mind of the main character and sort of the mindset that she's in at the beginning of the story, and hopefully it leaves people wanting more. So this book isn't planning to be published anytime soon, probably, but if you would like to hear more or if you would like to read the entire thing, please let me know, shoot me an email, send me a text, and I would be happy to send you guys the manuscript. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, questions. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, like, where did your characters come from? Like, are they versions of you, things like you wish you had in yourself, versions of your friends? Where does that come from for you?
Part of them were actually original characters I had created from a story that I was working on in high school. So so they went through a couple different iterations. They were original, but I think every one of them has a little bit of my personality infused in it, but I tried really hard to not let that constrain me. There's no one character that I feel represents me or anybody else more than anyone, but I think there are some characters that take on more of my personality and some that take on the personality of other people, but I tried not to let that constrain me when I was in the process. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is like a plot giveaway, but can you explain the title?
Oh yeah, Celadon is the name of the speakeasy she works at is the Celadon Club. Celadon, if you don't know, is a shade of green. The doors are painted green, and it also is just. I always think of green as a color that symbolizes rebirth and renewal and growth, which are some of the themes of the story that I was working on.
What was your biggest challenge writing this work of fiction?
I think the biggest challenge was honestly just finding the motivation to just sit down and do it. It's about 70 pages in a Word document. It took me a couple months to write it completely. Probably, hours and hours of work were poured into this. And I think just the motivation to actually sit down and take what's in my head and formulate it into something that other people can understand was the hardest part of it for me.
Are you hoping to publish it or do anything more with this manuscript?
I may look into self-publishing on Amazon. I don't think I'm really interested in shopping it around and publishing it in the traditional sense, since I do kind of want this to remain, it's kind of my pet project, my baby, and I don't know if I really want to expose it to the world too much,
Besides just the time to write a full 70-page document, what is one of the biggest challenges in writing something longer than, like, say, a traditional research paper that's only like 15 pages?
I think part of it, especially in contrast with a research paper, is that I generate everything. When you're writing an essay or a paper, you have something to base it off of, whereas everything had to come from my own mind. That was difficult, and also being able to create the outline and space it out so that it didn't move too fast or too slow and still had enough events while not being too oversaturated, if that makes sense. Trying to figure out the perfect balance between what's too little, what's too much, and what's perfect. Anything else? All right, thank you guys.